Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirard. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
Okay, so this time on this episode of the Disrupt Your Career podcast, we've got JP Elliott with us. JP is the Chief People Officer of accounting and tax advisory firm WilliamsMarston and has a long history of HR and talent management roles at organizations ranging from IBM and Taco Bell to Dick's Sporting Goods and McAfee. He's also an absolutely serious podcaster with over 25,000 downloads in less than a year. JP, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Claire. Excited to be here.
Wonderful. As always, let's start with your career journey. You've been through multiple shifts in your career, starting out in HR and organizational roles, moving through strategy and even brand work. You seem to have held a role in more or less every aspect of people leadership by this stage. Please share with us how this particularly varied career unfolded. And tell us about the aspects of, how much design was involved and how much serendipity. And please, the key moments of pride or achievements and the challenges.
Yes, happy to kind of talk you through that a little bit. I think like most people, where our career starts is with our families, and for me, it started with the influence of my mother and father. My dad was an entrepreneur, had a PhD in economics, but was really a very small entrepreneur, and very creative, worked in woodworking and actually had a gumball and vending machine business that he did. He built the machines himself. And so we didn't bond by going throwing a baseball or football in the backyard, as my son will attest to. I'm not very good at throwing a football, working on it. We would go and actually go out and put out vending machines, and we drive around. And I would go into stores at 15 years old and go and he'd say, go talk to that person and see if you can put a vending machine in that store. And we'd walk around. I remember this is when video stores and Blockbuster was around. My dad was like, those small businesses bought themselves a job. And so we always talked about business with him. It was all about business. We go to conventions and he would make me go and get quotes. And so there's this very heavy business background for myself. And then my mom was a marriage and family counselor. And so she was more the emotional human side of it. And so it was this really interesting dynamic that I always felt people in business was my passion and what made the most sense for me. And so after college, decided to found the field of organizational psychology, went right to grad school and got my PhD. And it was more of an applied PhD program. So we had to get a job and we had, the year you did a dissertation, you were working. So that was great. And for me, I've always been a little bit of a late bloomer, I feel like. And so I feel like I was playing a little bit of catch up. When I look back at my career now, my father passed when I was 30. So he saw me graduate with my PhD, but wasn't there for the other pieces. And I started my career at Taco Bell. Very, very fortunate. And, might tell you the story about how we got that role later, but, spent almost 5 years at Taco Bell. And my dad and I always talked about doing consulting. And so after he passed, I decided to join consulting, feeling like I wanted to learn. And part of my career philosophy, I think it really is helped me guide my career. I don't know if it's probably more serendipity. There's some design. I think all of us have some design in that, but we have to kind of react to what puts in front of us. For me, experience has always been the best teacher, and change is mandatory, but growth is optional for people. And so for me, I always thought if I'm getting comfortable, I want to push myself and continue to learn and grow. And that was kind of how I thought about my roles early in my career. I really feel like I need to learn as much as I possibly can the first 10 to 15 years of my career. And that's probably why I've moved a little bit more than most people have. And so I left Taco Bell where I was very comfortable and was doing very well. In fact, a lot of people I worked with then are still there today and are now like the chief diversity officer or VPs of talent, et cetera. They've all kind of stayed. It's an amazing company. I went to IBM, did consulting for a while at IBM, left IBM for a little bit and launched my own brand strategy and design company with a business partner. We did work for Flago and Fox and Warner Brothers. So about almost 2 years of running my own business, which is totally different.
Oh, yeah.
Went back to consulting. And, when I got back to consulting, I realized that IBM was really focused on large scale technology change. It wasn't really people oriented as much around human capital, and decided to make a switch into a boutique human capital company called Simpson Consulting. Learned a ton there, really enjoyed that experience because it really got back to the core of impacting business, working with business leaders, helping them solve their challenges through talent, organizational design, change management, whatever those programs were. And I felt like a lot closer to the client and actually solving problems. But ultimately, become a consulting partner, you have to sell work, and that's all you do. And I can sell, I think, but I also just didn't really love it. And I feel like I like doing the work. And I was lucky enough to get a job at Lenovo as a director of talent. I joined in 2010. The iPad had just come out. I know this seems like a long time ago. And everyone said the PC was dead. Lenovo is a Chinese-owned company, global company, more global than Chinese, but it is Chinese-owned. And it was amazing. I learned global mindset. I learned how you deliver programs and cross cultures. Half my team was in Beijing, and I was working basically all day, in the U.S. And then at nighttime, I'd be on the phone from 8 till usually 1 a.m,
Wow.
which became really challenging with the family, young family at that time. And then the work was tough because you were working and traveling almost at least internationally once a month and long hours. And I got a call to talk for the VP of talent at Brinks. And people know Brinks, we're talking armored cars and cash, and the farthest thing from technology you could expect. Very decentralized. And I really initially said, wasn't going to be the right fit, and turned down the recruiter. And he called me back like 3 months later, and I'd been thinking about it. He said, just meet Holly Tyson. And so I said, what can it hurt to have a conversation with the chief people officer? And Holly and I are still great friends to this day. She's one of my mentors, one of the best bosses I've ever had. And so I, at that point, was lucky enough to choose my boss. And the opportunity at Brinks was really transforming and turning around a business, and an aging business that needed to have more operational efficiency, et cetera. And we did that. And that role, head of talent, led me to be the actual HR, the leader for the US business for over 3.5 years. And then Holly left after I took that role. She went to Dick's Sporting Goods. I followed her to Pittsburgh. We left Dallas, Texas, where we were at. Dick's Sporting Goods is an amazing company. And then at that point in my time, my family, my mom was widowed, and my wife's parents were in California, wanted to be closer to their grandkids, and said, we aren't moving to Pittsburgh. Where can we all move? Because we want to be near you. And I chose to move back to Texas. And that's kind of what we've been back in Texas since. And so, and then most recently, I've shifted to private equity. And now I'm a chief people officer for a small, high growth accounting and tax advisory firm, WilliamsMarston, that's PE backed. And that was a purposeful shift this last year to get into private equity. I can talk about how I've done those strategies, but I guess, kind of going back to the answer, hopefully I'm not boring people with this piece, but I guess for me, what I would look at is I'm collecting experiences for the larger goal that I want to be able to do anything, whether it's a big chief people officer job, which is where I'm at today, or a smaller chief people officer job. But obviously that was the goal for me. But having the breadth and depth of experience is really important. And there are people who like to stay in one company. They're very lucky that they can have all these experiences for 15 years. And I encourage people to do that. I get it. I also think that you can't always make that happen. And so you have to make some of these moves. And so, Dick's Sporting Goods, if Dick's Sporting Goods was in Texas, I would still be there. It's an amazing company. I only left because we just couldn't be with our family.
Beautiful. So you've worked with some pretty impressive leaders of all kinds. What would be the top 2 or 3 lessons that you feel you've learned from working alongside such great scions of industry?
You can learn from every leader, every company. You should 100%, because there are amazing leaders you work for. Some are okay, and some are obviously bad, and you learn from each of those. I'm not sure I'll pick on the leaders as much, because I think I try to pick up a little from each person. I think about the companies, though. For me, what is the company good at? What's the company culture? How can I take that to the next company or learn from that? And so for me, Taco Bell, I learned very early on that HR can have an impact in the business. Taco Bell was owned by Pepsi. All the executives I worked with at the time really were Pepsi executives that now became Taco Bell. And HR had a very, very important role in everything we did there, which is not the way a lot of companies. And so I left. I realized, oh my gosh, other companies don't appreciate HR the way they did. So that was the first thing, is like, how do you be a business person first? How do you impact the business? At IBM, I learned, how do you manage and drive large scale change? What does that look like at scale in terms of thinking about the projects, thinking about the human impacts, the change impacts, all those things that you just can't do that unless you've done a large scale ERP implementation. For Simpson Consulting, being a smaller consulting firm, it was all about how do you work with executives? How do you have gravitas, executive presence? How do you sell and influence? And how do you be client focused, right? Instead of trying to sell what I think they should have or what I think they need, I need to sell and deliver what they want and what they think they need. Otherwise, it won't get implemented. And Lenovo for me was really about building a global mindset and how to implement talent programs at scale, worldwide, different cultures, not always easy. Brink's was all about turnaround. How do you turn around an underperforming business through talent? Definitely one of the most challenging experiences in my entire career, learned probably the most in some ways during that time period. And then Dick's Sporting Goods, it's a very well-run company, but I think the lesson there is the importance of why founders and CEOs who still stay involved or having consistency and continuity of leadership over 20 years is actually really important and very underappreciated, if you will, in the marketplace. We want to switch out senior executives after a year or 2 years, and that doesn't really work the same. But if you think about Amazon, Dick's Sporting Goods, Apple, these are founder-led companies, Tesla even, right, that have made a lot of progress, but they're run by the same person. There's a consistency of vision and culture that is really important. And, some companies have that with changing CEOs. But I think when I saw Dick's Sporting Goods was that consistency of focus really drove that results. And that's why they've continued to shine over the last 3 or 4 years as well.
Interesting. A company that has shone since you left them. What an idea, JP.
No, well, lots of companies have done well since I've left, but they were having a little bit of a struggle. We started to really improve. They've taken off like a rocket ship, I think, with Lauren Hobart's their new CEO, but they've done really well after COVID. One of the things I learned also there was I don't enjoy status quo roles as much. Some people are happy to run the program year over year and be like, here's my cycle. I like to get in, fix things, and hopefully have more of an impact. And so I'm a little bit better in situations where things aren't going as well, frankly.
Wonderful. It's so important to have those realizations, isn't it, along the way of what you do like and what you don't like. It's one of the most common questions that clients come along with. How do I recognize what I do or don't like in my career? Anyway, you're an expert transitioner. You've moved from one culture to another, both corporate and national, different functions. You're definitely an expert. What can you tell us about how you've managed each transition or what you've learned from the serial transitions that you've made?
Yeah, there's days, to be honest, Claire, I wish I didn't have as many transitions. Let's be honest. I would love to have stayed. And I think some of the best advice you can give to someone is that the most overlooked job opportunity is the one right in front of you. The job you have in your house.
So true.
And that so much opportunity in front of you at the right role. And so, but when I think about making these transitions and people who are good at this, and I don't know if I'm good at it, but I think I've gotten practice more than I like. You have to be curious, you have to be humble, and you have to be willing to throw out your previous playbook. And so for being curious, you have to be curious about the business. How does it work? Why do we operate? Why do we do things around here? Asking lots of questions in a very non-judgmental way, just really trying to learn as much as possible. So if you're not someone who wants to learn, it's not going to be really fun changing companies because it's transition time and you're uncomfortable and you have imposter syndrome and other anxiety all the time because you're trying to figure it all out and everyone else has been there for a while and says, well, you know this yet. So you got to be curious. Second, you have to be humble. I mean, we always are going to be confident, but you need to be humble. You don't have all the answers. You shouldn't move too fast when you make decisions. You really need to bring people along, ask lots of questions to bring a new perspective, but maintain being humble. I think a lot of people fail because they come in and they either badmouth choices that people have made. They don't know who made those choices, or they want to change things back to the way that they've seen it before in the past. They think that may be even the mandate. I worked at this company. I'm going to bring this company in here. Yeah. Those are all big mistakes for leaders coming in. My motto kind of coming into any role is really respect the past and embrace the future. And that's how I talk to my team about it. Like, I'm going to respect everything you guys have done to this date. We're also going to embrace the future together and figure out, are there things we can do that makes more sense, or because the situation has changed or context has changed. But I think the biggest mistake you can make as you transition is just not learning and really kind of saying, why would you do it that way? That's not going to go over very well for anybody. And then from a 90-day plan, I mean, there's plenty of great books on this. I just think of it in three simple ways. It's really about learning the business, the context of the strategy and what's happening for your role, kind of the priorities as well. But the larger context is really important. You can't start to make impact if you don't understand what the business does. Second is around relationships, your team, most importantly, your boss, your peers. How are you building those relationships? What's important to them? And third, of course, what are your priorities? What's the work that you have to deliver to get those quick wins? And I build those out. I talk to every person on my team and my peers. And I usually use this like 5 same questions. And I keep it very consistent. That way I can go back and kind of summarize what I've learned, and also helps me assess the team. And so I ask questions like, what's the biggest challenge facing the business today? What's one thing you do that keeps the lights on that no one knows about? Where are you undervalued? So it helps you get, I think, to learn a little bit more, but have to be very curious and humble and have some kind of methodology and approach, I think will help you come in and be successful in those roles.
Those standard questions sound like a really good method. That's definitely, I guess, part of advice for anyone who's making changes. But let's talk about young professionals who are looking to start out their careers. What advice in general would you give to a young person setting out on a career in business these days?
For me, I think, when you come into a role, be aware that you have an opportunity to make an impression, right? Your first impression is going to matter. And so my first piece of advice is do what other people won't do. And so what does that mean? That means you need to seek out the projects or work that matters, or people maybe I've ignored, and do those projects successfully. It might mean stay late, take on a project that people don't want to do. You need to differentiate yourself very early on in those situations. And that needs to be consistent, of course. You can't be a one-trick pony and you did one great project and you don't do anything else. But by doing that, you'll stand out. And I'll give you an example. When I first joined IBM, obviously a massive company as a part of their business consulting services, my first project was at Sprint. We had over 400 consultants on this assignment. This is massive. I mean, it was really one of the biggest consulting engagements I think IBM had won at that time. The change management team had 20 people on it. And the partner on that project, my day one, we had this meeting and she says, hey, we've got this deliverable due tomorrow and someone's got to clean up the PowerPoint decks. There's like 5 or 6 decks that have to come together and I need it by 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. And it was literally crickets in the room. And I said, I'll do it. It's like literally day one after the first week of training.
Yeah.
And I think myself and one other person, and we basically stayed up till I think 4 a.m. putting these decks together. And what did I do? It differentiated me. And that partner put me in other projects. And pretty quickly I had a bigger role on that team because she counted on me and I stepped up. And so I think you have to seek out and talk to people. And that work is there if you ask, hey, what's something that a priority that you haven't gotten to, right? That I could do on the weekends at night, whatever it happens to be, there are those opportunities. Just try to stand out. Second, I think you have to learn learn business. David Ulrich was actually on my podcast and he's amazing. And his example was that, if you go to France, you don't need to be fluent, but you need to be able to speak enough to converse with people. And you don't have to be fluent in business, but you need to understand enough to have a conversation. So you don't have to be like, I'm going to understand all the accounting principles, GAAP and non-GAAP. No, but you should understand that you have to make profit. And this is how we make a profit, and be able to understand, just have that conversation be so important. The best way to do that is honestly, if you've got salespeople or whoever is running that business, sit down with them and say, tell me about your job. Tell me about how you manage the business. How do we make money here? Just have those conversations. You'll learn more from that than you will by reading a book. But of course, you need to understand some broader concepts. So learn the business really quickly. People appreciate that. I think also build your network inside and outside the organization. We typically are pretty good about doing inside. We see each other, we build relationships, we go to lunch. And I think that's great. You need to do that. And you need to be very thoughtful about your time. And I think if you're going to approach a senior executive, don't just say, can I get 15 minutes of your time? Say, I've got some feedback for you. Here's some things I think you might find valuable. Offer something of value in exchange. If you send an email and say, hey, can I get 15 minutes of your time to pick your brain? That's not adding value. You're taking, you're not giving. So you want to give more than you take in those situations. And then outside the organization, even if you are an analyst, this is your first job, you have connections. You should build those connections, especially if you decide you're going to stay in one industry. That can stay with you your whole career. Go to conferences, see if you can get to conferences, maybe pay for your own all those things are really valuable and will pay dividends later in your career.
Beautiful. Specifically, a career in HR. If there's a fresh graduate out there listening, or somebody's son or daughter who is contemplating going into HR, what would you advise him or her?
I think be clear on why you're going to HR first, like anything else. What is your why? If you're answering like, I love people, I'm a people person, that's okay. You may or may not be as successful in HR if you're not thinking about this from a business perspective. But just understand why you want to be in HR, and then what areas of focus in HR do you think will be really important for you? There's things that all HR, in general, if you generalize HR people, we may have gaps in, whether that's data analytics, Excel skills. There's always those kind of stereotypes. I think it's important, though, to try to build yourself out in those areas. But once you know you want to be in HR, that's awesome. I think it's an amazing industry, one of the best choices you can make. There's so many different options. It's really learning as much as you possibly can the first 10 years. And so for me, I would pick a great boss over even a great company. And a lot of people say, well, I want to go work for Google or Amazon. And I think those are great companies. Yes. Hopefully you also get a great boss.
It's not guaranteed.
It's not guaranteed. And I think that's really important. And I started my career, I'll tell you the story about the Taco Bell experience, because I was in graduate school and we were about to finish my master's. I bought a suit, didn't have any job interviews, but I was like, I have to get a job. I'm going to figure out a way to get a great internship. I paid $100 to help someone help me write my resume at the time, right? I still use that same template. So I think it's the best $100 I've ever spent because I've never had to change the template. It still looks great. And then this is where I'm old, because LinkedIn didn't exist. And so I joined Organization Development Network a couple of different ways to get the mailing list. And I called every director in the book, and I sent my email to every person and cold called them. And Taco Bell picked up and said, well, I'm looking for an internship. And they said, well, we're not sure we have one, but come on in, let's meet you. We like your resume. And so I came in, met Mark Wilson and Kevin Weissman, who were the director and senior directors there. And that was sort of it. They said, we don't have anything today, but let's just stay in touch. And I continued to network. And ended up actually about 6 months later, I'd send to Mark and Kevin like an article once a month. Here's an Harvard Business Review article, thought was interesting, just checking in, hope you're well. Probably very annoying, but I was just very persistent. Like, I'm still here, I'm still interested. And then I ended up getting an internship at Disney. And when I went to the Disney internship, as I finalized my interview, I said it was like a 6 month or 9 month internship. I said, is there potential to get a job here afterwards? And he said, I don't think so. It's just this internship. I accepted the job because I needed it and I was in grad school, and I immediately did what I think most people would not do. I called Mark directly and I said, Mark, it's JP. I've just been offered a job at Disney. I don't want to take it. And he actually said, I've been offered a job at Disney. He said, well, when have you started? And I said, no. I said, I want to work for you. He said, come in tomorrow and we'll make you an offer.
Wow.
And, I was able to do my dissertation with Taco Bell, stayed there 5 years. Mark and I are still friends. And I knew he was a great boss and I really wanted to work for him. And I think I learned a ton of those 5 years. So I think really, really, we don't vet out our bosses enough. We don't ask them enough questions. They're asking questions of us. Why aren't we asking questions about your style and what's it like to work for you? Because I think if we did more of that, we would get ourselves in a better situation. So that's my advice for HR people. And then learn as much as you can. Rotate, try compensation, try HR generalist, try, talent, raise your hand and get those experiences, especially in those bigger companies. They'll let you do it. I think it's really for you to take.
Beautiful. Well, you've been learning a new skill in the last couple of years. You created a podcast called The Future of HR. You say it's the only podcast whose mission is to inspire the next generation of HR leaders. So what could be more apt? What was your motivation in creating it? Who's the audience, and what was your process for building it and promoting it?
I really just want to give back. It sounds a little crazy. There's two things going on. One, I have had so many amazing mentors like Mark Wilson, like Holly Tyson, like Mark Efron or Jim Shanley, people that I've known, and just so many people have made impact on me.
Yeah.
And I said, well, gosh, I really want to be able to do that. I'd love to develop as much talent as possible. Well, I don't have a 100-person team. I can't do that. It doesn't scale. But I said, what if I was able to find and put great HR leaders on a podcast? And really, like the last year, my wife and I started listening to podcasts. And so the idea came around that I could put great HR leaders, thought leaders on a podcast, introduce next generation HR leaders to what I think are the best minds in our field. And in that way, be helping develop and inspire more folks around what good looks like. It doesn't have to always come from me. I don't have all the answers, right? But when you start to bring different people on, different perspectives, I think you can learn a lot. And I love podcasts for that reason. And so it was really about just trying to scale and elevate our field. And I think that's one thing that's amazing about HR and your podcast as well, which I'm a fan of and been listening to for a while, is really just that we want to give back. We want to elevate the field. HR leaders are so generous, that I thought this might work. I didn't know it would go as well as I think it's going, I guess, as well, or the reception would be so positive. That's been awesome. But it really was around next generation HR leaders. And I say next generation because I had early career in mind, but that's a definition you can make for yourself. And what I've been so surprised about is that senior HR leaders are listening to the podcast. And Matt Breitfelder, who's Apollo's chief human resources officer, he had an amazing episode. And I post on LinkedIn and I see Peter Fasola, who's Johnson & Johnson's CHRO, commenting on the podcast saying, "What an amazing episode, Matt." And I'm like, okay, this wasn't really for the head of HR at Johnson & Johnson. I'm doing this for, someone on his team who he's probably met 4 or 5 times, for a long time, someone down there who's early in their career. So it's been great to see that. I think there was a need. And so I think people are gravitating towards that, but it's really just about trying to curate the best minds and make that impact.
Beautiful. I was going to ask you about what your ultimate desire for the podcast was, but I guess you're kind of there, right? If you've got the CHRO of J&J commenting and interacting, then you're hitting the target.
The question, I guess, becomes for anyone who's creating a podcast, you're putting yourself out there. That's the other part of the journey that I think it's just changed. This is something that's different that we didn't, 10, 15 years ago without social media. You're building in public. It's vulnerable. And so I wanted to show my children. I have a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old. I want to say, look what dad can do. Like, if you have some simple tools, teach yourself how to podcast. I do all my editing. I do all that myself. And if you put it out there, look what happens. And I think what I also said to myself as I started this is there's something called pod fade, right? If you do 7, like most people don't get past the 7th episode. And the reality is a lot of us quit too soon. And so I committed to myself to produce a podcast every week for 1 year. Rain or shine, I produce a podcast every week. And it's really about consistency. And so I think the consistency of doing that was like part of why it's been more successful, because it's there every week. And people are like, well, I guess he's not stopping. I'm in the 40s now. My goal is to get to 52. Do I have to now go to 104? I don't know, but I think it's been really interesting and I learned a lot from it. And I feel like when I get these emails, like, I think you probably get people who call you or email you and say, wow, I love your episode, or thank you for doing this. That makes it all worth it. And so I think it's making the impact I expected. So I'll do it for as long as I can at this point. We'll see. But I don't have any grand scheme like you do you said. I'm not trying to figure out how to monetize this. This isn't my full-time job. It's a passion project.
Wonderful.
But it's been incredible.
It's bringing a lot to many people. That's without any doubt at all. Let's go back to you. If you could go back to your 17, 18-year-old self, what sort of advice would you want to be giving to him?
It's easy to analyze looking back, but life is lived going forward. And for me, probably the only thing I would think about a little bit more is a little bit more of a long-term view on some of the decisions, right? I think, I think COVID proved this a little bit, that we can sort of be in a moment and we sort of go, oh my gosh, this is never going to stop. Definitely COVID lasted too long. It was a really tough period of time. But obviously at some point COVID was going to end, recessions end. Yeah. And I think for me, the long-term view, there might have been a few places where I'm like, hey, should I push past this role and stay here and try to get into a new role? Maybe there's more challenge I could have done here. If you look back and say those are things I could have done, but I feel like I'm pretty happy where I'm at. I think if I could go back into 18, I'm sure I give my own lecture that I give my own children and probably ignore them. But I feel like I've navigated my career the best you possibly can. And our careers are sometimes being in the right place at the right time. Luck plays a role in people's career. You get the right phone call. The job opportunity that comes up is the right time and you're ready to make a move. Those things happen. Otherwise, my mind, you have to make your own luck. And if you're not happy with where you are in your career or you want to change the narrative, go ahead. And frankly, the podcast has put people, seeing me in a little bit of a different light. I mean, I'm putting myself out there and creating new relationships. And so that was a personal choice to do that, but it was really about giving back. And so I think the same thing if you're 18 is you can make your life, you create the future, and that's what's most important.
Beautiful. Thank you. Now, let's think about HR and talent management functions in general in the world today. We'd love to know more about how you see things are going. Where have we made the most progress? Where's there still room for improvement? And what advice do you have for more seasoned, as opposed to the 18-year-olds, HR and talent professionals who want to be preparing for the future and increasing their own impact?
We've come a long way. I don't think we're fully there as a decision science. If you look at kind of finance and accounting and the journey they've been on, we're on that same path, I think, to have more consistent methodologies and how we look at things and how we do things. Because, you think about business leaders, they talk and they say, well, here's the P&L says, here's, GAAP or non-GAAP, here's what EBITDA means. There's no discussion. But when we talk about, well, what's a high potential? What's the performance rating? How should we compensate somebody? There aren't the same consistent frameworks. And so where I think HR still has work to do, and it's really more of a personal HR perspective, but we need to have more consistency in our mental model and decision-making frameworks and how we think about doing what we do. And why I say that is because it's not that HR people aren't aligned. It's that the leaders aren't aligned. And at the end of the day, the variable in companies is the CEOs and the leaders we're supporting don't always understand or buy into how we think about the world. And so, when you're really trying to get a program put in place, the first step is to make sure your leaders buy into that. And so in some ways, we need more of a consistent methodology that helps leaders understand the framework, kind of like finance works. So then they say, okay, I get that this is how we should think about talent. And because of that, these are the 3 or 4 ways we can either reward, differentiate, develop that talent. I'm on board, right? But a lot of times we are still trying to sell the fact that talent matters or learning development matters, et cetera. So that's one of the things I would say that the best HR leaders, the best CHRs I've worked for have a very simple mental framework that they get the leaders behind, and then they're able to execute on that. The second, I would say we've got work more. I think we've come a long way. Tools and people analytics. We have more information than we've ever at our fingertips than we've ever had before. The question is, how do we leverage that data? I still don't think we're making enough data-driven decisions. And there's more work around that. We love the technology. I think some few companies, the big companies, can put in internal talent marketplaces. Others can't. So I think it goes back to the basics. I feel like you've got to really, before you get into the advanced work, do you have the foundation really set? And that doesn't seem as sexy sometimes, but that's actually where I think you have the most value. So it's, for me, trying to figure out when you assess a company, like, well, how have we done all the foundational things right? And now should we move into the advanced phases and do all the leaders buy in and understand how we're going to operate this business and think and have a talent mindset? If you don't have those things, I think you're going to struggle to get to the advanced or later stages. Brilliant.
Any willingness to name 2 or 3 companies that are doing particularly well in this respect?
I don't work for Verizon, but, we had Sam Hemmock on who, is doing some really interesting things around being transparent with their internal marketplace and Workday, and even to the point of showing how many people are in certain roles so people can understand, what type of opportunities there are for promotion. A lot of times people think, well, hey, I want to get promoted, but actually you realize there's only 3 or 4 people in those roles. So maybe there's a different path you should take. I think there's a lot of companies that do things well across the board. But benchmarking in general, I think you start to lose the value of differentiating. So HR is great because we can pull this different work from Gardner or from McKinsey or whoever. Or now, Mark Efron's got a new one out around HR operating models. Those are all good inputs. But at the end of the day, the best value comes from saying, what's going to matter in this business? What are the value levers? And then, I think the tools are kind of the same. But Verizon is doing some really cool stuff there. I think Sam was great that she shared that on the podcast. I heard that recently.
Wonderful. And let's finish up with what's on your plate for the rest of the year. About to be the 4th of July weekend, but there's another half year to go. What's most exciting and coming up for you?
from a business perspective, I think, WilliamsMarston, we're looking at how we continue to kind of scale the business, right? What that means from a talent perspective, talent programs, how we support development of some of the high potential folks in the company. That's great. I just added to my HR team. So that's just exciting for me. From a podcast perspective, I'm really trying to continue to keep that up. To be honest with you, Claire, it is a lot of work. It's a part-time job.
Yes.
And just continue to get great guests. And so that's a focus for me. And then honestly, yes, it's summertime and family matters, and it's the time to spend with the kids and trying to make sure we've got a little bit of rest and relaxation as well. So those are the three big priorities, right? Family, work, and then a little bit of the podcast.
Fantastic. JP, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. Wish you a happy summer, though funnily enough, this will actually be published once summer is long over. But let's nevertheless be in this moment. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Claire.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.